Hello everyone and welcome to my first video on the Ricoh R1S. This was also called the Rollei Prego Micron, though the Micron has a Schneider lens. This one has a Ricoh lens. Otherwise, they're the same camera. What I couldn't tell you is whether they're the same optical design, one made by Ricoh, one made by Schneider, or whether Schneider made both of the lenses and Ricoh just branded this one as their own. This is a 35mm ultra-compact point-and-shoot camera. What that means is it can take any 35mm film basically within the limits of its ISO, and there are some provisions for that we'll talk about later in the video. Ultra-compact means that it is ultra-compact. It's very, very small. Even when it is powered on, it's the wrong button. Nope, it's on the back. The lens does not come out of the camera very far. It's a very small camera. The meter type on this was unknown, but it's likely a center-weighted meter, which is aligned with the center area of the image field, and that would be par for the course for this type of camera. My best guess is that there, as we'll see later in this video, there are some autofocus points. I'm going to guess that the meter meters off of the same area as those autofocus points. The autofocus for this camera uses 7 zone areas and a 3-zone viewfinder display. So basically the way that the display in this camera works is that when you look through the viewfinder, you see these 3 autofocus points, and as I understand it, within that range, there are 7 actual autofocus zones, and then the camera tells you which of those 3 autofocus points is being used for the focus. The focusing range is 0.35 meters to infinity. It has an electronic leaf or guillotine shutter, one of the two. Honestly, with this type of camera, most likely a guillotine shutter. The shutter speeds range from 2 seconds up to 1/400th of a second. The flash sync speed is unknown, but it will sync itself automatically if needed. The camera includes 3 image modes, which are called normal, which is a 30mm. This is a 30mm lens. Panoramic 30mm, which uses this at 30mm in panoramic mode, and then panoramic 24mm. And what that does is when you switch this to panoramic 24mm, it gives you the panoramic aspect ratio, inserts an extra element inside of the optical formula, and turns this into a 24mm lens. Honestly, kind of gimmicky. There are people, and I have done this, who have taped down the panoramic blinds on this to get the full image circle out of the 24mm. It does vignette at the corners a little bit, but quite frankly, if I could go back in time and talk to the Ricoh engineers, I would tell them just to take all that out and go with the 24mm lens all the time. At any rate, I take that back. It actually inserts 2 additional elements into the lens formula to make it the 24mm, not 1. That addition does make the minimum aperture for the maximum aperture at 24mm f8. Normally it's an f3.5. So when you convert this to 24mm, you lose a whole lot of aperture range, but generally speaking, that's just fine. So there are lots of people, well, I shouldn't say lots. Some people have physically removed the panoramic blinds from inside of this camera. I'll show you what that looks like, actually. If we go inside of the camera here, and we have to turn it on first. Okay, so I have it turned on, and if you look inside of it, you can see that this is where the lens is. Now, if I switch this over to panoramic, while I have it open, nothing's going to happen, but you can see that the blinds pop in, and then this is panoramic 24mm. So what I want you to look at right there is what the back of the lens looks like, and now let's see what it looks like in 24mm. And you might be able to notice there's a difference in what the lens looks like from behind when you're in 24mm. That's because those 2 additional elements have been put into the camera when I switched it over to pano mode. So anyway, if you do want to switch it to pano mode, don't tape your panoramic blinds down, because the tape will loosen and then the tape that you use will end up in your images. You can just trust me on that. And but if you do want to do it, either just put a little drop of plyo bond to hold the blinds in place, or just physically remove them. I'm not going to do that with this because I do plan on not keeping this camera for very much longer. just because it's, I don't have room. Anyway, so one quick note on this, two quick notes actually. The R1 and the R1S both have aluminum shells, though the finish on them does make them look a hair plasticky. This is actually aluminum, and it feels that way too. So it feels nice, and you can see there's a dent, might be able to see there's a dent right there in the aluminum. It just kind of looks in photos like it's plastic, but it's not. And one last note, these do have a tendency to have the LCD screen fail. The way that they work is that over here on the side of the screen, you've got your frame count, okay? The failure usually starts in some of these blocks and then progresses this way, which makes me suspect that the issue isn't, clearly it's not a leaking screen, makes me suspect the issue has to do with something that's connecting this inside of here. Is it possible to take this camera apart and fix it? There are no external screws on it, and so I don't know. The Ricoh R1S was targeted at upper-end casual photographers, somebody who didn't want a full SLR or a bridge camera, just wanted something they could keep in their pocket or their purse or whatever and carry around with them. There are some build quality compromises, such as a battery door, which can break. The film type window on the back here is surrounded by a foam, which once degraded is very hard to replace. That's why this one just has tinfoil taped over it. The black plastic grip here, or the plastic grip here on the back changes color. We talked about the LCD screen failing. So, and also the actual shell can start to come apart. Mine did that up here at this corner. I ended up having to put a drop of clear Gorilla Glue at the top here to keep the shell from separating on its own, because whatever the shell clips into can break. So there are some compromises, and it just as these now are getting older, it is worth taking care of them and treating them gently if you have one to use. The viewfinder on this has 83% frame coverage, which gives you all kinds of room to crop and reframe your image in post if you're not happy with what's on the film exactly. And it has 43% magnification, meaning that what you see is going to be 43% of the size of what's going to be on the film. That's fine with this camera because you have no manual focus option. A large viewfinder is really only meant for manual focus precision. So having a small viewfinder like this makes it really easy just to look at the scene and frame it and have an image turn out. The lens on this camera is very good by compact point and shoot lens standards. It is tiny and mostly automatic, which is very nice. Easily pocketed, as I mentioned. It does, by the way, I did mention it has a very good lens. It is a step down from the GR series lenses, for those of you who are familiar with those cameras. The button feel on it is fairly mediocre, I would say at best, and at least on mine. The shutter button, it works, but only if I press on one side of it. So again, like 30-year-old camera, what you gonna do? When these came out, really good option. Today, if you can get one that's in perfect working order and you take care of it, it can still be a good carry-around camera. This was made by Ricoh in Japan from 1995 until unknown, but this likely only had a 1 or 2 year production run because that was pretty typical of point and shoots. And the GR1S came out in 1997, and my best guess is that this would have been discontinued by the time that arrived. It was preceded by the Ricoh R1, followed apparently by nothing. This seems to be the end of the line for this form factor from Ricoh. And that's really all the biographical information on this camera. So now if you have your R1S, we're going to go over what everything on the camera is, and after we do that, we're going to talk about what everything does. So on the camera's top here, first over here, this red button is the flash mode button. So I'll turn it on, and this part of the LCD screen worked this morning, so you can see the flash modes are scrolling through here. When we get to the flash, I'll go through what each of these different modes are. Here is the self-timer button, which turns the self-timer on and off. So self-timer on, self-timer off. And also with the self-timer, if you have a remote control, I've never seen one, I don't know what it looks like, but apparently you can use a remote control with this camera. Then over here we have the mode button, which switches between the different modes. And I have a section on that later in the video where we'll talk about what all the different modes are. Here is the LCD screen, and then the shutter button over here. Just going to reset everything. There we go. On the camera's front, we have this light right, well, we have the make, model, and lens and information. This red light is the self-timer countdown light, and then I believe this one right here is the remote control sensor. There's also one of these windows, I think it's this one up here, has the distance measuring window for the autofocus unit. Then we have the the flash up here, and then these two windows, this is the viewfinder unit, and I believe this has to do with the light meter. So anyway, what these exact windows do, they give you proper focus and they give you a proper light meter reading. On the camera's back, we have the switch between normal, 30mm pano, 24mm pano, your autofocus and flash indicator lights. So if your autofocus lights up green, what that tells you is that it's having trouble getting focus. And if your flash is a solid red, that means your flash is going to go off when you take your photo. Viewfinder window, power button, little rubber comfort grip, and your film type window down here. The bottom of the camera doesn't have a whole lot to see. Tripod socket, battery indicator, serial number over here. This side of the camera, we have a date stamp indicator. Now the date on this, is good through December 31st, 2024. So if you're watching this in the year that this video gets released, well, hey, you have a few months more that you can date imprint your photos. Don't bother doing it. Date imprints are not something that are needed. They were basically for evidence gathering, so that if somebody was just out at like a job site, needed to take photos documenting that there was a problem with a safety issue at a construction site on a certain day, they could date imprint. Mode, select, and set button, these control your date imprint right here. So what you want to do when you're going through your mode, select, and set is go for the dashes like this is set up here, because that indicates that you're not going to date imprint. And honestly, imprinting a date is really, it is going to ruin an otherwise good photo, so just turn that off. Here is your strap loop, and as you can see, I have a strap connected to it. This side of the camera only has the film back release, and I'm going to push it down, and that will pop open the back of the camera. Oh, and a manual rewind button if you want to rewind your film before the roll ends. So here inside of the camera, we have the film take-up spool. It's kind of backwards from most cameras, but this is where the film is taken up. Shutter window. These two little black holes right here are little lights, and as the film moves across the back of the camera, these will imprint the date onto the film. Film cassette area with DX code readers. Over here, on the film door, we have, well, this is covered up, but this is where the window would be for the film type. Film pressure plate, and like a just retaining spring over here. Pretty standard stuff inside the camera. So, being a fully automatic camera, there's nothing we can do with this without first putting in a battery. So the battery chamber is on this side of the camera, underneath these indicators. To open it, you just put your fingernail underneath the bottom and pry open, and here's the battery. To remove the old battery, you just simply lift up on this plastic grip and the battery will pop out. CR2 battery. There's an indicator inside as to which way to load it. The positive terminal goes towards the bottom. Slide it in, close the door. We've changed the battery. The next thing I'm going to show you how to do is to load film. Okay, so this will use any 35mm film from 50 to 3200 ISO, and it must have a DX code on it, which this one does not, and I don't have a film cassette at my desk that does. DX codes are basically just black and silver checkerboard patterns on this part of the film cassette right here, and that tells the camera what type of film you're loading, the speed specifically. If you do not have a DX code on your film like this one doesn't, or you're using a specialty film without it, the camera will default to 100 ISO as your speed. So just be sure that if you're using something like a 25 ISO film, you're going to know that you have to push it 2 stops. Realistically, this camera shouldn't be using 25 ISO film, but just bear that in mind. You need a DX code or it will shoot at 100. To load the film, we're just going to angle it into the camera this way. And there's a retractable rewind thing down there. You want to angle it onto that. Okay, pull out your leader, feed it into the side of the camera this way, and as soon as I close the camera, it's going to automatically advance. There we go. And now, as we can see by no, it did not automatically advance. This is the second time this camera's done that to me. Okay, maybe I'm not pushing it far enough. Let's try this again. So as you can see here, the camera's going to fully advance the film all the way through. There we go, up to the 36th exposure. I didn't realize I had that much film in that cassette. Anyway, going to pre-advance the film the whole way. And then as you take photos, it's going to rewind the film through the camera. So every time I take a photo, it's going to count down. And we can see inside by opening it up. Now, one quick note, film is one and done. You don't actually want to open up your film back, because if you do, everything that is outside of the cassette will be ruined. So once you load your film, keep it completely closed until you are done and the film is rewound. Okay. But I wanted you to see that what it has done is it's taken all of the film up onto the spool here, and then I'm just pulling the film back into the cassette as I take photos. And now it's going to rewind everything all the way back to the beginning. So once it has finished rewinding your film, what you're going to do is open the back, and there you go. You can see it has completely rewound the leader into the cassette, just like that. And you can then grab your next roll of film, put it in, or if you're done shooting for the day, drop this in your bag. Now, if you only take a handful of photos, anything fewer than the number on the film, and you want to finish for the day, and you don't want to finish the whole roll of film, all you have to do is grab like the tip of a pencil and hold it and press this button down, and it will manually rewind the rest of the film. And then when you send it off to the lab, what you'll get back is just fewer photos on that roll. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go through everything that's on the LCD, because the next few things that we have to talk about are covered on the LCD, and we want to know what everything here is. Okay. Over here on this side, these are your flash mode indicators: red eye reduction, flash, force flash, no flash. We'll see how these work together in just a minute. Remote control and self-timer, which we saw when we talked about the self-timer button. Battery alert: when your battery gets low, this will go on. If this is not on, either your LCD is bad or your battery is just fine. This down here is a set of different symbols. This is the maximum symbol right here. This is like everything lit up. I don't think you would ever actually see everything lit up, but this will do things like force infinity focus, nighttime mode, things like that. So we'll talk about that in a minute. And then over here are your numbers for your film up to 36 frames. So that's what's on your screen. Now, if we go into flash mode, what you see here first is that the red eye symbol turns on. Now, what the red eye does is all of your flash is going to be done with the on-camera flash right here. There's no way to control an external flash with this camera. With this red eye mode, what's going to happen is that you will get a pulse of light before the photo is taken, and that will cause the pupils in your subject to shrink, which will reduce the appearance of red eye when using color film with human subjects. So that's red eye mode. This next mode is the flash symbol with the bar and circle. Now what this means is your flash will be off. You are not going to get a flash if that symbol is lit up, okay? So that's first button red eye, second button flash off, third press force flash. If only the lightning bolt is on, every time you use the camera, whether it needs a flash or not, it will fire a flash. And then this last mode where the flash symbol is blinking is what's called slow synchronization. And what this does is this uses the flash and a slow shutter speed to give you deep depth of field, and so that you can use this indoors to get both subjects in your foreground and background in focus. So basically, blinking means long shutter speed with the flash. Hit it again, and now there's no flash symbol at all. No flash symbol means that you are in auto flash mode. This is the starting point as well, by the way. And that means that if your camera needs to use the flash, it will, and if it doesn't, it won't. The next thing we're going to talk about is this mode button right here. And you can see here that now I can scroll through the modes. That's nice. Okay, the first mode is, the modes are, by the way, flash setting dependent. Okay, in the default power on mode, which is what we're on right now, your all modes within the mode button are available. Okay, so if you go into your flash button and you have a different flash mode activated, some of the modes won't work, but all of them are available. We're going to scroll through them and talk about what they are. All right, this first one right here is this crescent moon symbol and this person symbol right here. These are blanked out, so it's this one and this one right here. Okay, this is called super night mode, and basically it's night portrait mode. What that means is that it's going to give you a slow shutter speed and a flash, so you can capture the lights of a cityscape in the background and a person who's sitting in the foreground with you. To make the most of this mode, what you want to do is tell your person that you're taking a photo of, don't move until I tell you to, because if they move during this long exposure, then they'll be lit up and then the lights behind them will show through. Okay. Next mode is this mountain and are these two mountains right here. Okay, so those are the two indicators, and this is called infinity mode. And what that does is this forces the camera to shoot at infinity focus. So basically, if you have a bunch of mountains in the distance and you want to get a picture of those, have the mountain symbol showing, and you will get a picture that does not accidentally focus on something closer. The next mode is just this dot right here in the center, and this is called single autofocus mode. What this does is force the camera to use only the very center of the frame, the very center autofocus point, for confirming autofocus. And basically, when you look in the viewfinder, you would normally have 3 autofocus points, right? Left, center, right. Single autofocus point mode forces the use of the central autofocus point. Push it again, and we're out of all of the modes. Okay, the next thing that we're going to talk about is how to use the viewfinder. So when you look through the viewfinder on your camera, which is this window here in the back, this is what you're going to see in 35mm mode. Okay, these are your framing lines, basically. So, by the way, these lines will only illuminate when your camera's powered on. So if your camera does not have a battery, you won't be able to see these, but just as a heads up. So when you look through your viewfinder, this is what you're going to see. These lines on the outside indicate your framing. If you have your entire image inside of this inner box, then you'll have some room to crop when you get your photos back as a digital file. This is your right, center, and left autofocus point. Whichever one of these is lit up, when you go to take your picture, will tell you what's going to be in focus. If you switch your camera from normal mode to panoramic mode, now you get this viewfinder, okay? And what this viewfinder does is give you framing for your 35mm up here, and then this line down here on the bottom, as well as the autofocus point, and then it tells you it's in panorama mode just as a reminder. Now, if we switch the camera to wide pano, what this does is bring up this mode right here, which is your 24mm pano, and it drops the top and bottom lines, and what that indicates is that now your image is going to be from this corner down to this corner instead of this line's corner down to this line's corner. Okay, so that's how you read the different viewfinder displays with this camera. And now the last thing that we're going to talk about is how to take a photo with this camera. Okay, basically, you're going to select your flash mode however you want it if you need to change that, your self timer if you want to use that, your mode if you want to use that. You're going to look through the viewfinder. You're going to make sure that if this light here is red, your flash is going to turn on. When the AF light up here turns green, that means that you have focus confirmation and the camera is going to take a picture. And then you just hold the shutter button down and take a photo. Okay, it's that simple. It'll advance the film for you and you're good to go. All right, that's really awesome. What about double exposures? You can't. The only way to do a double exposure with this camera is to shoot an entire roll of film, let it rewind, retrieve the leader, and run it through again. That's it. There's no other way to do a double exposure with this. So this is meant for single exposures, and it has built-in double exposure prevention. Now, some things not to do with your camera. You don't want to let your camera get wet. It's not weather sealed. Water will absolutely ruin this camera. It will short it out and destroy it. So don't let it do that. Don't keep it in your car, because the heat and the cold can affect the mechanisms, the LCD, the electronics, and they can ruin your camera for sure. And honestly, any camera in a car that's unattended is going to be a theft target. Don't store it in a plastic bag or box unless you have a good and rechargeable desiccant pack, and the reason is because plastic's moisture permeable, and if you get fungus on your lens, it's going to degrade the performance of it. It's not the best lens ever made, but it doesn't have to be. Honestly, that's not what this camera sets out to be. But you also don't want to get fungus on it to ruin it. And just remember that your Ricoh R1S is a precision tool that should be handled with care and respect. And as long as you take care of your camera will take care of you.